So in this mini chapter, I will be demonstrating the mesh editing techniques used on this DVD just on this simple mesh so that you can see more clearly the workflow used in creating various elements of our Ninja character. First I'll just go over some basics. Objects in Blender have two main modes, Object Mode, which I'm in now, and Edit Mode, which allows you to manipulate each or any amount of vertices that make up a mesh. I can select with right mouse button any of the vertices, just like selecting objects, and also hold Shift to select multiple vertices. Also, just like objects, I can hit G to move, and the G stands for grab, R to rotate, and S to scale. So what this square or plane is made up of is 4 vertices, and that is basically a 4-sided face. And this is usually called a quad. And if I can come in to the mesh and hit W to bring up the specials menu, here I can choose subdivide. And what this will do is increase the amount of faces. If I do this once, twice, and 3 times, you can now see that we have many of these quads or 4-sided faces on our mesh. 2 or more that are next to each other then become what's known as a face loop. And a face loop is made of 2 continuous edges, and these are known as edge loops. Two edge loops parallel to each other create our loop of faces, our face loop. I can select a whole edge loop by holding Alt and right mouse button selecting. This will select a continuous row of edges until either the mesh runs out or the edge loop ends. If I hold Ctrl Alt and right click, I can select a face loop the same way. That's 2 parallel edge loops. But there's one other type of face that we'll be using in Blender. If I connect 3 vertices together, it forms a 3-sided face, or a triangle, also known as a tri. For organic modeling, special attention needs to be paid to the way that we do use these quads and tris so that we can create the shapes that we want with minimum glitches. If I make a merger between these 2 vertices by hitting Alt-M and choosing center, it will create 2 triangles inside our mesh that we subdivided. Triangles cause edge loops to end. You can see that if I Alt right click this line of edges, they cancel each other out at the point of this triangle from both sides. Topology is the word given to describe the way in which edge loops and face loops flow around a mesh. And to create good topology, especially in organic models, we need to keep these triangles to a minimum. If we come in and add a subdivision surface modifier, which is used in almost all organic models, you can see that if we move the mesh up, and increase the subdivisions, the triangle causes our mesh to pinch, which is unwanted compared to the nice, smooth areas that are 4-sided faces. Quads are the connecting blocks that we use to flow our edge loops, and the aim of good topology is to direct these and to help achieve definition where we want it, be it the muscle on an arm, the nostrils of the nose, etc. Poles can be caused by selecting many vertices and merging them together. They are usually a point where many edges are coming in to meet at the center. They do have their place as they're used to help guide our edge loops around, but do use them sparingly. I can switch between 3 modes of selecting. If I hit Ctrl Tab, it will load up a small menu here, and I can choose between vertex, edge, or face. Selecting edge will allow me to select all the different edges of my mesh. And by selecting face, it will cause a small dot to appear at the middle of every face that I can select. I can box select with B, and if I select this group of vertices, I can hit E to extrude. It will automatically begin translating across the normals. I can right click to cancel this, scale down with S, and what we've made is a face loop around our extrusion. If I Alt Control right click, you can see now that I've created a whole new face loop by extruding. By hitting Control R, I can add a loop cut. With the purple outline, I can hit the left click to confirm, and this will allow me to slide between either of the other edge loops, and then I can confirm again with left click to place it. And this will just create another edge loop within our face loop. I use this a lot in the training DVD for creating a ninja, for adding things like trim around part of his clothing, or the appearance of stitching. I can add two loop cuts very close to each other. I can then Alt Control right click and select the whole face loop, and then extrude that. If I add a subsurf modifier, you can see the effect it has on organic modeling. If I create a new edge loop by pressing Ctrl R, left clicking when I see the purple outline, and sliding it closer to another edge loop and confirming with left click, the closer my two edge loops are to each other on an uneven surface, the sharper the corner will be. This is known as beveling. But I don't have to create a new edge loop to achieve this. If one is already there, I can simply hit Ctrl E to come into the Edges menu, select Edge Slide, and that will allow me to change its distance from any other edge loop. There is also a way to sharpen an edge loop without adding another loop in between. If I come into Edge Select mode and select some of these edges, for example, I can go into the spacebar menu and type Crease. I'll then choose the option Edge Crease, and the further that I move away my mouse from the center of the edges, the sharper the crease will be. This option is useful when it's too tricky to add another edge loop, but I do recommend you use this sparingly. In organic modeling, face loops are much more important than in hard surface modeling, especially when subdivision surface modifiers are used. If I have my flat plane without any bending at all, I can add in as many tries as I'd like, and it won't make any visual difference. But if I bend or move the mesh, you'll start to see the distortion. I can press the O key to turn on proportional editing, and move large portions of the mesh at once. The surface is unnaturally uneven. This could work okay for some terrains, but for modeling a face or a certain part of the body, it would just seem too distorted and bumpy. But if I keep my plane as all quads of crisscrossing edge loops. And I move it the same way with proportional editing. The mesh is much smoother without distortion. Here we have an example of one triangle surrounded by quads. Just as I could take any two vertices from quads and merge them together to create triangles, I can take two vertices of a triangle, and if I merge them together, it will simply cancel them out into one edge. From there we can go in and connect quads. You can also achieve the opposite of merging. If I come into Edge Select mode and select these edges in the middle of my mesh, I can hit the V key to rip the edges away. I'll choose which side that I'd like to have my cursor on, and that will dictate which way the vertices will rip. Once I've hit the V key, I can simply move the edges away and a gap forms. You can even extrude these newly formed edges. This is similar to how an eye is modeled. If I come in and rip at the very end of a mesh, it would seem as though my only option to connect this face would be to make a try. But sometimes I might do this so that I can add a loop cut, for example here. Because if you look now, I have 4 vertices, and if I connect them with F, it actually forms a quad. It doesn't quite look like one, but if I move the vertices around, you can see it really is a square. Doing this allows me to add more detail by adding an extra loop cut here, as you can see by Alt-right clicking, but it doesn't affect any of these faces on the other side. I also may not want to add any loop cuts on either side, as that might not be helpful to what I want. So I can just come in and add these 2 very end vertices here, make an edge with F, hit W and subdivide. And if I move this vertex out, you see we have 4 vertices again, and I can join them with F. I usually call this type of face a diamond quad. It's still just a quad. It's really just a skewed square, as you can see. But what this allows me to do is to take these 2 new edges and extrude them out. And now these can form their own face loops. And this is all with quads. So it may look like initially all I can do is create a try, but as long as I can get one more vertex there, we can keep it as quads and make sure that our mesh stays as smooth as possible. Getting a little bit more advanced now, Let's say that, for example, I'd like to have this face loop at a certain point jump over and be a part of this face loop. Well, what I can do is simply come in and delete some of these vertices. I'm left with a big gap in my mesh. I'll switch to Edge Select mode and reattach the faces. But instead of reattaching it along the same face loop, I'll reconnect to the face loop next to it. So it starts on this face loop and then gets derailed and moves over to the face loop parallel to it. And so I've coined this term a loop derail. I can now reconnect the faces next to it in the same fashion. And as you can see, all of these face loops now have been moved over to the face loop next to it. One side effect we're left with is that now we have these two gaps on either side of the mesh that we've been editing. But if I switch back to Vertex Select mode, you'll see that if I select these vertices, there are 4 of them. So we can simply hit F and create a quad on either side. And that will help patch up the editing that we've done. Here's another scenario that I face a lot while modeling this Ninja. We have a gap of the model left to fill in. There's 4 edges at the bottom area on this side, and only 2 vertices here. Now technically with 6 vertices we can come in and add 2 faces, but this just doesn't really look too right. But by creating 2 more vertices, by making an extrusion and just pulling it out to the middle, what we can now do is add a face from here, face in the middle, and a face here on the other side. So now these 3 faces that arc around our gap now complete the face and keep everything looking clean and smooth. Finally, here is another mesh editing technique that I use to help define 2 different muscle groups meeting each other. In the case of our Ninja, I use this to match together the front of the shoulder and the top of the pec. And let's say that this area here is around where our left shoulder muscle is, and this area here is the top right part of our pec. And we want this area here where this vertex is to be a point where the 2 muscles meet each other, and we want to see the definition of these 2 rounded areas of the muscles. Just simply having this square here doesn't give us enough definition. What I want is an edge loop to cut right through diagonally so that we can add some more definition on either of these 2 diagonal sides. So what I'm going to do is delete this vertex in the middle, and this will give us some space to reconnect the vertices and redirect the edge loops. I'll start by adding my first edge right along here. So now we have these 2 triangular areas that will represent the shoulder at the top right and the pec at the bottom left. I can virtually re-add that vertex that we deleted by simply subdividing this edge. So now we have once again this vertex in the middle, except now the edges are going diagonally rather than crisscrossing. At this point we have 6 vertices on either side, and we could surely create 2 quads in the triangular shape here. But that isn't exactly what we want either. We need to add something that makes this edge loop here connect to this bottom one. So what I'll do is just add an edge with F. And already we can see now that this edge connects down and takes a 90-degree turn. we're left with shapes that will only give us tries, so that's not good. But what I can do is simply subdivide this area as well. So this triangle now actually becomes a quad because we have this extra vertex. And that also allows us to add 2 more quads because we have the right amount of vertices in this section. So that's a lot better now, and I can repeat this for the other side. So you can now see that we've turned this edge loop in a 90-degree angle, and so we have this whole area as one section that we can add definition to. And also this whole section as well. And what that gives us is a wonderful definition between the 2 different sections. And so here we would have the edge of the shoulder muscle, and here the edge of the pec muscle. And from there we can just change the amount to which it's defined. So these were just a few examples of how I use mesh editing and topology to define certain parts of my Ninja character.